Hello, everybody. It's a pleasure to have you all here. Welcome to the second of 5 public conversations that are part of the Counterpoint series that we are hosting this semester, probably for the 4th or 5th year, starting in 2016, when it became very clear that many of these colleges, small liberal arts bubbles, were not quite in sync with, I have to really mind my words today, they were not quite in sync with what was happening in the country at that time. This was shortly after the election. And the purpose was to create a space where difficult, challenging, sometimes opposing ideological views were presented in a way that allowed for the students primarily, but also to the faculty and the administration and to alums all over and the public at large to understand how those that think differently from us do so, and for them to understand us as well, an attempt to find a bridge in an increasingly fractured country. And some 8 years after that, the fractured nature of the country is very much still with us, and maybe that's the constant excuse for a series like this. This year, we are devoting it to, each year has a different topic, and this year is the connection between democracy and American English, the English language. To what extent is the language that we all speak, all 35 million citizens in this country, the glue, the place of encounter that enables us to still feel united? It's a word that I think we will be exploring together. And to what extent even that language is fractured or tenuous or ethereal and is disappearing in front of our eyes or as we move our tongues. This series is made possible by the class of 1970 who made the original donation, and I want to thank them. There are many, many viewers online, many alums. My particular gracias to all of those members of the class of 1970 who put the seed money, and to the many others from that class and others that have contributed to this, though it sometimes feels that the alums leave and that's it. Do something in the world. We don't want to have anything to do with you. The fact is that we very much think of you constantly, and you shape how we do things here as well. The first installment was with John McWhorter, the New York Times columnist and linguist who teaches at Columbia University. Today it is with John Morse, who is the former president and publisher of Merriam-Webster. And I want to invite, I'm going to talk just more about what John does and the many colleagues that are of Merriam-Webster and what a dictionary is. In a second, I want to invite everybody. Exactly a week from today, we have the third installment. It is with the best-selling novelist and Amherst alum, Dan Brown, of the Da Vinci Code fame. It will be exclusively online at 7 p.m. Everybody is invited, students, faculty, administration, alums, and the public at large. I am thrilled to have you here with us. I have so many things that I want to ask you. I want to first recognize that Merriam-Webster is our neighbor just in Springfield, that the great institution of the most important American dictionary is just next door, and that we have you here at Amherst to reflect on what it means. You work with Merriam-Webster for many years. Give us a little taste, John, of those years. How many reflecting on your time there.
Well, thank you for having me, Alon. You have picked, I think, a wonderful theme to be talking about of language and democracy, and this is a perfect place to be doing that because there's probably no one on the face of this earth who has thought more about this topic that you're wrestling with than Noah Webster. For him, this was a crucial, life-defining concern of how do we unite this brand new country and do it through language. And it was something that he worked on throughout his whole life. And as I'm sure that the Amherst community knows, he's one of the founders of Amherst College. He lived here in Amherst from 1812 to 1822, working on the dictionary. So fair to say that Amherst in many ways is the birthplace of the American dictionary. There's some people down in New Haven, I think, who are going to debate us on all of that because before and after he lived here, he lived in Amherst. But this really is a perfect setting for us to be talking about the relationship of language and democracy. My own journey through Merriam-Webster, it is a long one. I arrived at Merriam-Webster in 1980. As an assistant editor, set to work on doing lexicographical projects. I will jump ahead that I ended up being editor and being the president and publisher. That is an unusual thing to happen. Editors don't usually get to run publishing companies. It's sort of aligned to, and I don't mean this in any derogatory way, but it is, as they might have said, the lunatics running the asylum. But it was because my real interest not only was in dictionaries, but also in the process of making things. I think I was always interested in how do you make things. I was a bit of a tinkerer as I was growing up and looked at things, magazines like Popular Mechanics, and wanted to make things. And what I learned is that what I really liked to make was books. Which is not too surprising. As I often tell people, I am the son of two librarians and the brother of a third. So books were always a big part of my life. I was recounting to some of Alon's students at dinner that I always had to be careful growing up not to ask my parents for any help on a term paper or a project, because immediately the books would start showing up on my desk and it wouldn't stop. It was like Sorcerer's Apprentice. They just kept coming and coming with more and more books. And I sort of had to say, no, I have enough. And I have deemed that librarian's syndrome, that just they don't know when to stop bringing you books. But so that was a real, I think, an interest of mine. I came from a family of readers, not only reading books, but having books read to me. I have vivid memories of my grandfather reading Last of the Mohicans to me as a young person. And I may come back and talk and touch on James Fenimore Cooper, because he is germane, I think, to some of the things we're talking about tonight. So I came in not only with an interest in writing the dictionary, but also in crafting and building, putting together the projects, putting together budgets, thinking about how we would take on projects, because there's always a fear, and it's a well-placed fear, that if you're going to make a dictionary, it's just going to cost too much. And they do. Dictionaries are always expensive. Going back to Noah, he pretty much bankrupted his publisher of the 1828 because it's just so expensive. So trying to convince the powers that be that it's not as expensive as they think it's going to be, and it's going to sell better than they think it's going to be, was always a big part of my interest in being at Merriam-Webster. And in fact, that was the career path. It went from one kind of editorial management to another, where I had the great fortune of just having wonderful editorial colleagues who would pretty much do whatever I asked of them and come through with wonderful successes. And there are some people here in the audience tonight who know who I'm talking about, who were able to just create magnificent works, reference works of all kinds, and really building on their great successes. At one point, there was a need to put in a new president at Merriam-Webster, and there was also a new owner of our parent company, and someone knew that I had the title of executive editor, and one of the consultants working with the new owner of our parent company just came to me one time and said, "You're the executive editor, so do you know about business?" And I said, "Yeah, I know about business." And that was it. They said, "Okay, you get to run the company for a while." And I was fortunate enough to run it for the next 20 years.
Wow. And you retired in 2016. So I want to set up the evening. I'm going to be asking John a series of questions connected with the durability of dictionaries, to the ideology of dictionaries, to the challenging aspects that dictionaries present to us today. And then we will open it up to questions. There is a microphone that will be circulating, and Heloise Schwab, my wonderful student here, will be bringing the mic so that everybody who speaks can also be heard online. Stay tuned for that. John, I was telling you the other day that we were together on a radio show that during an event in LA with an extraordinary number of high school students, valedictorians, very bright, I dared to ask them how often they use the dictionary, and if they thought that the dictionary was important for their future and for our country's future. And I am conveying to you again, as I mentioned in the conversation, the dismaying answer that they couldn't care less. They thought that a dictionary is a dinosaur item, and that they can find the words in different ways. How do you make the pitch to a younger generation that is apathetic, seems to me, or maybe I'm reading it wrong, of what dictionaries do? Or maybe do you agree with them now that you're not representing the company? Is this a dinosaur?
Well, I think the first thing I would probably want to ask is, did they imagine that you were asking about how important a print dictionary is, or how important are dictionaries in general? And I would think that we probably have to concede at this point that for a younger audience, the print dictionary itself probably seems pretty irrelevant. And I think from the point of view of a dictionary publisher like Merriam-Webster especially, that's not a terrible thing. Unlike some other dictionary publishers, Merriam-Webster is not necessarily, and I would assert, never was primarily in the business of selling books. Some of the other major dictionaries that were on the market did come from publishing companies who were fundamentally interested in publishing books. But I would say because Merriam-Webster was so focused on doing dictionaries, we were not that focused on publishing books. And thank God, because frankly, book publishing is a brutal business, and the sooner you get out of it, the better.
I should hear that now that I started my own publishing company. But that's another conversation.
Yeah,
Go on.
You just wait till they start coming after you and say, we want 60% off the list and free freight.
Well, they have started. Go on.
Yeah, go on. Yeah. I think, though, if they meant also including digital dictionaries, then I'm a little surprised because, in fact, there is heavy use of digital dictionaries. Our website alone probably gets around 100 million page views every month, with probably about 40 million unique visits and maybe 25 million unique users every month coming to Merriam-Webster. And we're not the only dictionary online. Dictionary.com probably has about the same number coming to it, and then there are other online dictionaries as well that I don't mean to slight. So there's a lot of traffic, and there is even more traffic coming to dictionaries on mobile devices. At some point in my career, the lines crossed, and more people were looking at the dictionary on a mobile device than they were looking at it on a laptop or any kind of stationary device. So I dare say a lot of those students may well have told themselves they're not using a dictionary, but if they needed to know a word, they Googled it. And if they Googled it, I'm telling you, they got a professionally prepared dictionary from a professional staff. Even if they just get the entry that's sitting on the top of the Google results page, that's from Oxford. And if they go down and they click on the first link underneath that, they're probably going to go to Merriam-Webster, which is the Merriam-Webster dictionary. If they click on the next one and they go to dictionary.com, that was created originally by Random House. So they may be using dictionaries more than they know. I'd also just add a couple other wrinkles to this, which is I think people don't really become power users of dictionaries until they're in college. You can probably get through high school with minimal use. You can't get through college without a heavy use. Not for nothing was a dictionary often the graduation gift given to high school graduates.
And why is that? Why can't you get through college without a dictionary?
Because you start encountering a lot more vocabulary. When you're in, certainly within middle school and I guess to some degree in high school, the books that you are given to read are designed to be readable by you. A textbook publisher, and most of what you'll use in high school as textbook, have strict rules about making sure that the vocabulary is vocabulary that you can understand.
And that changes in college.
And that changes in college, because if there's someone in college and they're reading a book by Alain Stoffens, Alain did not write to a reading formula. You used any word that pleased you. And so I think in college you just encounter a lot more vocabulary, and that vocabulary is crucial to a success. You are seeing it in a moment when that's very relevant to you to know what that word means, and I think that really creates a bond between people and their dictionary. Very often when I'm doing appearances like this and talk to people afterwards, one of the first things that audience members will say is, I still have the dictionary I went through college with. Because they bonded with that dictionary. It's almost like a soldier and his gun. There's that kind of closeness. The third thing I will just mention, and this is, I think, to me the more disturbing part, is I think that there always has been a role for dictionaries for younger students, for high school and junior high school students. But they're not being used as much any longer. For one reason or another, in our current learning environment, it is problematic for a teacher to be using a dictionary in the classroom. And what our market research has told us is the prominent way a high school or junior high school or elementary student finds out a word, if they need to know the meaning of a word, is they ask the teacher. It turns out that's the easiest and most efficient way to
help. So the teacher becomes the dictionary.
The teacher becomes the dictionary. So I wouldn't be surprised if the young people you were talking to said, well, we don't need a dictionary. If we don't know a word, we'll just ask the teacher.
Yeah. Now, two things. One is I remember very vividly the moment I made my last, I said my last goodbye to my father when I became an immigrant in this country. And he deliberately gave me as a present, he had been saving it in New York City on Lexington, and I think it was 59th, the dictionary, bilingual Spanish-English, that he had used when he was a student in New York at the Actors Studio, and he wanted me to have it as a talisman. Right. Do you think that college students still have that connection with receiving a present of a dictionary, or now because it's online they'll get a copy of the most recent bestseller?
I think you touch on something that is a little bittersweet. I have a feeling that kind of exchange of a physical object happens less, and because I think you can't just say, Alain, you're leaving home, here's the URL I think you ought to go to. It just.
How do you spell that? I would have said right.
I mean, something is lost in that, and I think that's too bad. I think it is too bad.
One of the things that I learned, John, in teaching, I teach high schoolers, middle schoolers and high schoolers every year during the summer, is that my extraordinary summer students do not know how to alphabetize. Because they can go on Google, they can go on a search and find the word that they want to simply by typing, instead of knowing that the B precedes the C. One of the things that you have with the dictionary is that you have to put your finger in somewhere and see what word comes before and what word comes after. It's like going to the library. You don't necessarily leave the library with a book you were hoping to get. You might leave the library with 2 or 3 other books that were standing by in proximity. What is the impact, and I don't mean in any way to be nostalgic about a better past, what is the difference between a generation that grows up with a dictionary online that is Merriam-Webster and a dictionary that is physically Merriam-Webster?
I think a few things are lost, and I think it is to some degree the fault of those of us who were responsible, myself included, for putting dictionaries online. We overlooked the fact, consciously to some degree, that the text of dictionaries was originally written to be seen on a page. And that if I get a little techie in my vocabulary, the unit of consumption for a book is the page. You can see the entire page in front of you, so you know what was the entry that came before, what was the entry that came after. The unit of consumption, and I think this was a mistake for us, the unit of consumption in a digital dictionary is the entry itself. Deracinated, if I can use that, from that page, and a lot gets lost. Because in the print dictionary, there was very relevant, pertinent information before and after the entry you looked at. For space-saving reasons, you simply did not repeat that information over and over again. So if you have a list of entries that are essentially derivatives of each other, but still deserve their own place entry, we don't repeat maybe the pronunciation in each of those entries. We certainly are not going to repeat the etymology in all those entries. We had assumed that you would say, if I looked up cleanly or cleanness, that you would see the entry right before that's clean, and you would see it has an etymology, and you would look at that. We lose that richness when we show entries in isolation. I think in fairness to certainly to Merriam-Webster and some other dictionaries, over the years since 1996, when we actually began putting the dictionary online for without any kind of charge, that some of that has been repaired through putting in more hot links to other entries, maybe even adding some more information at entries that weren't there in the print. So we've done what we can to repair that, but I don't think we have wholly repaired it. So I still think in many cases it's often a richer experience to have gone to the print dictionary because you see the entire page and not just as if you were looking at an entry through a keyhole. I'm a little, as the son of 2 librarians and the brother of a third, I am a little distressed by your telling me that people don't know alphabetical order. I was certainly brought up on alphabetical order, and if there are any librarians out there on Anglo-American cataloging rules and how to alphabetize, and I've always been annoyed by the fact that when computers now alphabetize, they do it because of the ASCII value of the letters and not actually the way those of us who are sort of trained in human alphabetization would do it. I think it's I'm sorry if people have lost that. I can't tell you immediately what damage that does to Western civilization, but I mean, I'm going to guess it does some damage someplace, somewhere.
So many valuable things. The speed with which you find a word, the capacity of jumping from one word to another so quickly and effortlessly. I mean, there are many, many benefits.
Right. There are many benefits, and I would be the first to agree, and I think that I think if nothing else, I think that More people today are probably using their dictionary more often than when it was a print dictionary.
Because it's online.
Because it's online, and because, as you say, it is fast. Yeah. The only pushback that I made, and I used to make this particularly when I was talking in the early 2000s, is that the print paper dictionary, bound and typeset as it is actually a remarkably efficient piece of engineering. As you alluded to, the thumb notches down the side, guide words across the top to guide you to the particular page, bold-faced letters along the left-hand column so you can quickly scan to what you want. All of the data elements giving a kind of distinctive typographical appearance so that you can immediately navigate to the piece of information you want. There are probably upwards of 1 million separate data elements in a college-level desk dictionary, and most people were able to get to the piece of information they wanted in less than a minute. So I still will sing the praises of the print dictionary, but at the same time, I will tell you, I was deeply involved and an advocate for let's get this dictionary online for free as soon as possible. We've got to do it. This is the way.
You have no regrets.
No regrets.
Yeah.
Not
just
one.
The idea of a dictionary, let alone an online dictionary, corralling every single word in one's language, in between covers, organizing them, giving some logical, coherent approach. Wow. It seems obvious because we have the dictionary in front of us, but the idea behind it is magical. It's miraculous.
Right. I was reminding some of your students tonight at dinner of what really goes into that. When we revised the college-level desk dictionary, which is also the dictionary that makes up most of what is on the online service, the dictionary you probably all went through college with yourself. It's the sort of 6x9 dictionary with about 1,600 pages. When we revise that, we make upwards of 100,000 different changes. If you look at all the changes we make to definitions, to etymologies, to verbal illustrations, to pronunciations, to synonym paragraphs, add them all up. There's usually about 10,000 new words and sentences that go into a new edition of the dictionary, but there's about 100,000 changes that get made. Each of those changes are looked at by about 10 different people. There will be the definer who did it originally, whether it's a general definer or a science definer, life science or a physical science definer. There will be the person who assigned the date of earliest use to it. There will be an etymologist. There will be a pronunciation editor. There will be a cross-reference editor. There will be a copy editor. There will be a final reader, and some of those people come in more than once. At least 10 different editors or at different editorial stages go through. So you multiply the 100,000 changes by 10 people, it's 1 million editorial decisions get made in order to bring out a new edition of the dictionary. And in most cases, we do it in 18 to 24 months.
Since we are talking about the quantitative aspect, how many words does the most complete? I have a friend who says there's no such thing as an unabridged dictionary. All dictionaries are, by definition, abridged. The moment they are published, even online, already something has been left out. There's the dictionary of the outside and the dictionary of the inside. How many words does Merriam-Webster have in the most recent edition, and how many words are there in the English language?
It's almost impossible to answer the second because people don't know how to define the word.
That's an answer from a lexicon.
Right. Do you count all the homographs of a word? So, is work a noun, a verb, etc.? Do you count all of the obvious derived forms? Do you count all of the inflected forms, the past tense?
So let me say yes to all of that.
If you're saying yes to all of that, the biggest database of words that we make available, which is on our unabridged website, is probably, and I should make sure that Peter later on can correct me, but I'm going to say it is certainly around 500,000. And I think if you go to the only thing that's likely to be bigger, the Oxford English Dictionary, which includes even more obscure inflected forms than we do, and actually goes back a little further in the language than we do. I think it's maybe 600,000. People, when they say how many words in general are in the English language, tend to throw a million around as just kind of a loose walking around number. I think there's really no way of knowing, because you really would have to decide how much usage does a word have to have in order for us to call it a word. I mean, if my wife and I have a word that we use that only we use, is that a word? If a scientist comes up with a new chemical and gives it a name in the laboratory, but never publishes a paper about it, but it's a well-formed chemical term, it's used all of the kinds of chemical combining forms, is that a word? Because if that's a word, we're going to have to amp that up to probably double it or triple it. So maybe we're 2 million,
and
3 million.
There's no reason, John, to think that every standardized language, I'm thinking Spanish, Russian, German, French, Italian, has the same number of words. Would you say English has more words, and the Merriam-Webster dictionary includes more words than the most authoritative dictionary in French or in Italian or in Spanish?
I'm frightened to answer that, knowing I have a colleague who knows more about French than I do, and you on stage who know way more about Spanish than I do. But there's reason to believe that English would have more words. And the reason is that it really is a hybrid of Romance languages and Germanic languages. And that just ups the number of words we have, just because we're essentially embracing two different linguistic streams. And I think that's a good thing. I think it's why often there will be more synonyms available in English, because of those two different sources of words. And those synonyms will have slight differences in connotation or denotation or application. So I think we do. There's reason to assume that English has got more words in it, and that allows for a little bit more creative uses of synonyms.
Now, one of the things that my father used to tell me, John, and I wish he was here, but he's here in spirit, is that dictionaries are neutral. They won't tell you what to think. They will give you the tools, the words. Are dictionaries neutral? And let me ask this, twisting the question. Not too many years ago, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, there was a death threat against the staff of Merriam-Webster because somebody from Texas, I believe?
California.
Was objecting to the way the word woman was being defined by the dictionary, and thought that the best answer was not to send a letter, but to come and shoot somebody in the head. Do you guys get death threats all the time?
Well, first off, he wasn't going to shoot us through the head. He was going to blow the building up.
Oh, okay.
There's
a difference. Sure.
And I think that there may be some other parts of this story that we're getting a little wrong, and we're going to invite one of the Merriam-Webster editors up in a while, and perhaps he can sort of correct some of the places where I may be a little fast and loose with what happened. But yes, there was a person who objected to the way we were handling the names for male, female, woman, and man. And the core of it was that there's a phrase that appears very often in conversation and in writing, transsexual woman. Now, the idea when you are defining is that you come up with a definition that is the semantic equivalent of the word you're defining. And when you're talking about transsexual woman, no definition in the dictionary was fully replaceable with that sense of woman. That sense of woman was not the same as what we had in the dictionary. So we changed. We added a definition of woman that would replace and be the semantic equivalent to the use of woman in that phrase of transsexual woman. And that got a lot of people very upset because they miss the fact, and this is a crucial issue about dictionaries. Dictionaries do not describe things. They define words. So we were making no comment about whether or not, by your sense of what a woman ought to be or is, whether our definition would match that. That's not our job. Our job is not to tell you about things. Our job is to tell you, what did a person mean when they used that word? And what did you mean when you used the word transsexual woman? So they took this as being some sort of endorsement for acceptance of transsexual people. And that got them very upset. We got a lot of people upset. We got a lot of letters. We had the same thing when we modified the definition for marriage. And we had to explain to people, if you're going to use the phrase gay marriage, then we have to put a meaning in the dictionary that defines marriage in the phrase gay marriage. Now, you can say that there shouldn't be gay marriages. That's not the point. If you're going to use the phrase gay marriage, we have to define it. And we got a lot of criticism for that as well. Generally, we kind of brush off this kind of thing. I mean, if you're going to be in the dictionary business, you're going to have to get used to the fact that people are going to object to what you're doing. And we have frequently been the object of protest movements, of threats of boycotts, any other way that you might coerce a publishing company into doing something different from what they're doing, and you get used to it. I mean, if you're afraid of criticism, don't go into the dictionary business. I think it was Samuel Johnson who said something about that. A dictionary maker can never aspire to being praised. The best you can do is avoid criticism, and he wasn't able to even do that. And no dictionary maker can avoid criticism. If we're doing our jobs right, it doesn't change what we do one iota. We have got to. Our job is to tell the truth about language. Our great editor of Webster's Third in the 1960s made this quite clear. The job of a lexicographer is to tell the truth about language. That's what you're there for.
Now, let me push you just a little bit, John.
Okay.
The FBI got involved.
Mm-hmm.
You guys had to leave the building for some time,
mm-hmm.
and there must have been a sense of disquiet at the very least, if not fear as well. Is there a subconscious after effect or aftershock of this, of thinking next time we're going to debate a certain word, maybe a self-censorship, we have to be more careful, we don't want to go in this terrain, we're going to wait more time until this gay marriage or transsexual woman have accumulated more repetitions in different parts of the country? It's a natural response to self-preservation.
Mm-hmm.
So is there a feeling that you would be more tentative next time when a hotly debated topic comes forth in the editorial discussion?
I think the answer is no. I think that there is a long tradition, going back to Noah Webster, of being stubborn, single-minded, sometimes out-and-out disagreeable people. Lexicographers can do that. We could just be stubborn sons of bitches, and I think we are in the grand tradition of Noah Webster, who got huge complaints about his dictionary when he published it and was vilified in the press for some of what he did. Webster's Third, the great unabridged that is still in print today, that came out in 1961, was vilified in the press. New York Times and all of the press organizations that we tend to praise today, just their heads exploded when Webster's Third came out. So we're used to getting that. We're used to being banned. We're used to being taken off of approved lists. Certainly, the dictionary has been banned in a lot of schools because we have words about sex in them. Famously, there was in the state of Texas, where they have what they call adoptions of textbooks. They were not going to adopt a collegiate dictionary for use in classrooms unless we took words out of the dictionary.
This makes me think, John, that Adventures of Huckleberry Finn cannot be taught right now in several states of the South because of the use of the N-word, which was included by the original author, Mark Twain, and there have been attempts to cleanse the text in order to bring it comfortably to the classroom, and every time there is one, there's an uproar. But the Merriam-Webster can use the N-word with great care, and that was one of the protracted protests that Merriam-Webster undertook shortly after I became president. That was sort of my baptism of fire. There were some women in Michigan who found the N-word in the dictionary and were shocked, dismayed, etc. And without going through all the ins and outs, a huge letter-writing campaign went on to tell us to take the N-word out of the dictionary. And bear in mind, it does not appear in school dictionaries. It only appears in the collegiate dictionary and the unabridged. And why is that? Is this a deliberate effort not to present that word to a certain reader population?
It has to do with a number of different factors. School book publishing is its own kind of beast, and a large part of it is what are the words you're going to be encountering in the classroom. And if you're not going to be encountering that word in the classroom, then we probably don't need to go there. I think there's also some sense, and I think this may be some of the sensitivity about Huckleberry Finn, that when you have those words in a text or a dictionary that's being used in the classroom, it can lead to a certain amount of mischief making in the classroom that could leave some students feeling embarrassed or harassed. So there are reasons to be a little careful about dictionaries where they're going to be used in a classroom. But again, the collegiate dictionary is being used in all adult settings and in college settings. It would be an act of irresponsibility not to include that word in the dictionary, if only because it gives us the opportunity to talk about what a truly offensive word it is. We can't tell you what a truly offensive word that is if we don't put it in the dictionary to tell you. Silence on that subject is really probably not the best thing to do. But the particular people who were objecting and who in time got the support of the NAACP threatening to boycott us, were taking the position, no, you ought to just take it out of the dictionary. It shouldn't be there. Or if you're going to put it in, you need to define it differently. And this was one of the most disturbing parts of my career in publishing. Is there is a story apparently that is told of a young African American child first encountering that word and being taken to a big unabridged dictionary by an adult and shown the word in the dictionary, and the definition given is an ignorant person. And being told that's what that word really means. It doesn't mean a black person, it means an ignorant person. No dictionary that we have ever found until this incident came along, no dictionary ever included that word. This was a kind of urban folktale that emerged. And at one point I was being interviewed by a reporter who happened to be African American about this. And I told him about this odd situation that people have this memory of being taken to a dictionary and shown the definition for that word, and it was an ignorant person. And he said, "Oh, yeah, that happened to me too." To this day, I cannot account for that, except I think it is some way, some kind of a psychological way of coping with the real harm that word does, such that there is a kind of a folk tradition that that's not what it means.
Fascinating. I take this opportunity to remind everybody that aside from all the extraordinary people that have helped put a series and an event like this together, we have books by Amherst Books here available, including the Merriam-Webster Dictionary. And I would love to have my own copy signed by the author, which brings me to the question, when we talk about Noah Webster, the great Noah Webster, one of the kind of silent or eclipsed founding father, who was intent of making a language American for a new nation that was emerging, and the extraordinary, my superhero, Samuel Johnson. We talk about dictionaries that have single authors. That means not finishing in 18 months a project, but in 18 years a project, or in an entire lifetime a project. But that also means that when you go to Johnson's dictionary, you hear Johnson's voice when he defines oat, or when he defines lexicographer, or lawyer, or whatever it is that he's going to be defining. Whereas here we have a committee that defines words. Mm-hmm. There's a moment in the history of lexicography where we go away from authorship to committeeship. I don't think that's a word, but maybe you guys can consider it. This concept of, there's a big joke that a committee trying to put together a horse ends up with a camel. Mm-hmm. Putting together a dictionary with a committee, how different is it than from an author? Just talk about those differences.
Right. It's something, and we know exactly where that switch takes place. It's with the 1864 edition of Merriam-Webster's Unabridged Dictionary, and it's the point at which the job of, it's going to be the most thoroughly revised unabridged dictionary in the entire line of our dictionaries. It's a huge job. As you say, if it was one person, it would take decades, and they didn't have decades. They were in the midst of a very intense competition with a competing dictionary. They had maybe 3 to 4 years. We talked about this a little bit before with some of your students. The methodology is not a committee, and I need to sort of set that concept aside. Dictionaries are not written by committees. Recall I said we're going to make 1 million editorial decisions in 18 months. If you did that with a committee, it would be as long as having a single person do it. So a dictionary is actually a collection of individual decisions by individual authors. It's kind of, if you will, it's an anthology of the thoughts of the editors who worked on it. But for all of that, I do think there is a uniform voice that staff of editors is able to adopt. And it is a slightly stylized voice. If you've read about the King James Version, when they created the King James Version, they deliberately used language that was about 100 years or so before the language of the current time, because there was a sense that the voice of authority is probably of a preceding generation. There's a little of that in the dictionary. I think to some degree we tend to speak in our parents' voice when we create the dictionary. And I think it's the same idea of you bestow some authority on it if it's in a more, I'll just say, old-fashioned voice. Some dictionaries avoid that. When Webster's New World came out, they specifically made an effort to say that the voice of the dictionary would be the voice of colloquial America. It actually turns out it's not that different, but but there have been efforts to not do that. And certainly dictionaries designed for English language learners try to define words in a very simple language. I think for most dictionaries written for most native speakers, there is a kind of voice. It is not one person's voice, but it is a collective voice. And it is a voice that doesn't change that much from generation to generation. So, in fact, when you look at some definitions in the dictionaries, it probably is the same way it was in 1924. That's just part of being a dictionary. And I think Peter will talk to, can even point out that there are still some unrevised definitions from Noah Webster's time that are still in dictionaries today. They just kind of slip through. Noah was an expert definer. Everyone says that the one thing that Noah got right, and he got a lot of things wrong, but the one thing he got right was he was just a born definer of words. So some of those definitions exist to this day. So I was going to say, I think there is still a voice. Yeah. It's not a single person's voice, but it is a kind of institutional voice. It's distinctive. It's recognizable, it is of its kind.
I have just a couple of questions and more, and then we'll open it to the audience. And we're going to invite Peter Sokolowski, who is a longtime friend and editor-at-large of Merriam-Webster, and who has taught here at Amherst. He and I taught together. We believe it's probably the first class ever on dictionaries on a college campus, an American college campus. I have two more questions to ask you. The first one is this word that Noah Webster used proudly and has lasted, is one of those messages that has traveled through time, the dictionary as a unifying force. Yes. And you've mentioned it in the radio when we talked together and with my students today, the dictionary as a unifying force. God, if it exists, knows that we truly need unifying forces. But the dictionary?
Right. It seems a little far-fetched, but if you take yourself back to the 1780s, when Noah, as a young man, is trying to find himself, all of the ills that we find ourselves facing today were there in the 1780s on steroids. The idea, there was a real question of whether those 13 colonies could stay together at all, or would the whole thing fall apart. There were deep divisions throughout the country in terms of sectional differences, political differences, ethnic differences, linguistic differences, economic differences. We were a shattered country in many ways in the 1780s, and it was a real fear that the whole thing would simply fall apart. Some of it right here in western Massachusetts, the most blatant example that scared more of the people in Noah's time was Shays' Rebellion. Because here you had essentially a private army grows up. I mean, if we worried about January 7th or 6th, here's an army raising up because it doesn't want to pay taxes, and it goes down to Springfield and attacks the United States Armory in Springfield. By the way, across the street from Merriam-Webster's current offices. So, this story strikes close to home. But it particularly scares Noah. It also scares people right into having the Constitutional Convention, which he is a big part of. The idea that we needed something to offset all of the centrifugal forces driving us apart with some centripetal forces that would gather us together was key to his thinking. And it was not far-fetched. The fact is that English as spoken in America was diverging from English as spoken in the UK. There had been English speakers in the now United States since the 1640s, back essentially almost in Shakespearean times, and obviously their language over the course of 200 years was going to change. The language in England over those years was going to change, and by the time you're in the 1780s, it is a discernibly different kind of English. And there was a self-consciousness about it. There was a sense that America was a new nation. It's a new culture. It should have its own literature. If it's going to have its own literature, it should have its own language. If it's going to have its own language, it should have its own dictionary. And certainly, I think for some people, that was a thing that they could rally around. It was an object of national pride that there was this. Oh, I'm very sorry about.
No worries.
If you're an old person, that's the reminder it's time to take a pill. So I think it was an understandable and a reasonable thing to say, let us have a national language and let us have a national dictionary. I have to say, at the same time, there were people, and I'll now allude back to James Fenimore Cooper, writing at about the same time, who were deeply suspicious that you could do this. There was a feeling that there was no particular national language. I mean, in fairness, the national language that Noah was trying to push was essentially the language of Western Connecticut. He was, having grown up in West Hartford, he kind of thought English as spoken in Connecticut was just about the best form of English you could have. People like Cooper, who were in New York and Pennsylvania, sort of thought, no, that's not the right language, and called into question the whole concept of was there a national language, and could there even be one? Yeah. And really to say, no, there cannot be a national language. It ignores too many of the variations. And Noah himself knows that. I mean, one of the quotations we were sharing earlier is Noah Webster says in the preface to his very first dictionary that the more he thinks about it is, there is no fixed standard of language that even the educated will consent to be governed by. It just doesn't exist. We are too big and varied a population. Where does that get us today? I think in exactly the same spot. I still think that we are well aided by recognizing that we can in fact communicate in English. And not just within this country. I think one of the things that we won't get into tonight, but English really has become a lingua franca around the world. And if you've done business internationally, you know that very often people from two different non-English speaking countries will find English as their language for communication. There is, I believe, a body of English vocabulary and meanings that we all share. How much do we share? We could argue about this, but I think there is some shared part of the language, and I think it's delightful. I think it is one of the best examples of unregulated consensus making that you can point to. That just simply throughout any academy, throughout any government interference, throughout any professors or English teachers, we as an English-speaking people, through a kind of, as I say, unregulated consensus, have established a kind of core of the language. And I think what the dictionary tries to do is to at least record what that is. Yeah. And then what is one of your students put it perfectly. I mean, we are reporting back to the English-speaking population about the decisions they themselves have made about the language. But is it ever perfect? No. Do we unite everybody? No. Are people left out? Yes. It is a perfect world.
This is just perfect, John, because the question that I'm going to ask you last is the same question that I asked the head of the OED, the Oxford English Dictionary. It strikes me, maybe because I was not born in this country, and I'm not from the UK either, that the central and centralizing dictionary that England, the UK produces is based in a university, and it's a non-for-profit, even though they are profit-making, it's a non-for-profit that have the dons who decide, whereas you guys are a commercial enterprise that have to survive in the Darwinian world of the book selling, and a commercial vis-a-vis scholarly academic? What's the difference between running a dictionary when everybody's in a university and running it as a business?
Right. It is the perfect right question. I think it makes all the difference in the world, and you're right to use the word Darwinian. One of the things that I have said, sometimes mostly to be provocative, is that the dictionary is the quintessential democratic document. It exists because we value the beliefs and actions and words of the English-speaking people. We believe there's validity to it, validity enough for us to record it, and it's important that we serve the needs of the English-speaking people well. When you are a commercial institution, that's the only thing that keeps you alive. Yeah. That's the only thing that keeps you. If you're not meeting the needs of the English-speaking people, you will cease to survive. The history of dictionary making is riddled with dictionaries that failed. One of the true factors, at least about American dictionary making, is it has always been an intensely competitive enterprise. There's almost no time in the history of American dictionaries where there weren't two or more dictionaries competing for the public's approval. That's good. The dictionary during the time of the Merriams of Merriam-Webster, the people who really took over responsibility for publishing Noah's dictionary after his death, we're in a big competition with a dictionary from Joseph Worcester. And at one point, it is reported that George Merriam, who was the president of Merriam, said, "Thank God for Worcester." Yeah. That kind of competition really is what keeps the dictionaries responsive to the needs of the people. And I think that happens in a way that I don't think happens if you're essentially saying the ultimate judge of whether this is a good dictionary or not are the creators of the dictionary, whether it is through a Royal Academy or whether it's through a university press or whether it's through the government offering different kinds of support. When you make this a purely commercial enterprise, it's as close to a democracy as I think we ever get. And if I could say one other thing,
please.
By chance, by absolute coincidence, tonight is the 180th anniversary of when that process begins. It was 180 years ago today that George Merriam, as I told you was the president of what was then the G&C Merriam Company, was sitting down in New York City on a business trip, and he encountered someone from Amherst, who from the J.C.&S. Adams Publishing Company here in Amherst, who actually were the people who first got the rights to Noah Webster's dictionary after he died in 1843. There were copies of his dictionary and unbound sheets of the dictionary left over when he died, and a bookseller and a printer and publisher up here in Amherst got rights to them. George is down in New York City 180 years ago today, bumps into Adams and finds out that Adams is having a hard time selling those dictionaries. And George gets the clear impression that Adams would be willing to do a deal to turn those pages over to the Merriams, who had been running a printing and publishing company here in Springfield since the 1830s. And what he says he writes a letter 180 years ago today. He writes a letter in his hotel room back to his brother Charles in Springfield and says, "I want you to get a hold of this Adams guy and figure out whether there really is a deal for us." And he tells them, and it's sort of interesting, he says, Adams wants to get back home to Amherst, so he's going to be getting on a train pretty soon, and he's going to be heading back to Amherst. He wants to get home quickly, so I don't know if you can get him to delay in Springfield to have a meeting with him. But, he says, because 180 years ago today, it was about as rainy and drizzly as it is today, and he says, it's possible that Adams won't want to go the rest of the way back home to Amherst, because he says, Adams goes for comfort. And maybe you can get him to just pause and delay and spend the night in Springfield. He says, if you do sift this deal with him thoroughly, he says, and he puts this in quotation marks, now is the time for bargaining. And he tells Charles, he said, this is important, sift this carefully. Half of this book alone will be worth more to us than any other book we have now or are ever likely to have. And that is the beginning of a commercial publisher taking over the rights of a dictionary. It's the first time it happens in this country. It's the first time it happens in the English-speaking world. It'll be another decade before Longman does the same thing for Roget's thesaurus. But it is the reason why there still is a Webster's Dictionary today. But for that, there probably would not be a Webster's Dictionary. We probably wouldn't be here.
Oh, interesting. We are going to invite Peter Sokolowski to come on stage. Thank you. We'll continue the conversation. Peter, we can pull that chair, and then your movement from there to here will be edited out, I am told, from the screen. Wonderful having you here. Peter, aside from being editor-at-large of Merriam-Webster and a longtime colleague and friend of John, he is also the occasional host. I don't know if I'm presenting you in the right way, Peter. The occasional host of in the New England Public Radio for jazz.
Every Thursday night, as you drive home, you can listen to me. So
this is the moment where we're going to open this to...
I want to ask the first question. While John is hot on that subject, take it one step further, which is, I think we're living not in the age of the Internet, but the age of identity. And how does the dictionary connect to not just democracy, but to identity? In other words, is it a tool that cuts both ways? And how does that affect? Because we chatted a bit about this last week. Well, the fact is that if we don't have a backstop, a neutral, objective backstop in an age of alternative facts and fake news, what good is it?
Well, I think the question I think I hear lurking in there is, to what degree do we have to be crafting the dictionary in such a way that it commands the confidence of our readers? And I think it is. I think it's absolutely key, and I think it's a big part of what we're trying to do over the past 20 years or so. I think a fear that you have as a dictionary maker, or as the custodian of an institution that has its roots preceding even the Constitution of the United States, a deeply rooted American institution. What happens if people start losing faith in that? Does that mean that they start losing faith in other kinds of institutions? And I think I've personally felt very much the pressure that we, in a time of a lot of social change and a lot of technological change, a lot of economic and financial models changing, that we owed it to the American people not to fail. We owed it to them to keep their confidence in us, because if we could keep their confidence in that American institution, maybe they would keep their confidence in other American institutions, and maybe we could even be, to bring this back to democracy, a force that pushes back against anti-democratic impulses. I think that all of that has to, we had to find a way to speak to people about the kinds of concerns they had, but also in the ways that they wanted to be spoken to, which again was the movement to going online and to embracing a bunch of other technologies was actually crucial to maintaining our credibility as a treasured American institution. And I think that was a big part.
And of course, I'll put this in the context of what we were talking last time with John McWhorter, and what institutions like this are going through is that we are going through a period of intense skepticism about the government, about the role of higher education, the role of authority in general. It's no surprise that the dictionary right now, as an authority entity, would also be put in question, and that the dictionary in return has to figure out ways to remain current, to speak for the people and by the people. The democratic nature of the approach.
We have to do our best to be more inclusive in the language that we include in the dictionary, and I think Merriam-Webster has done well with that, of really pushing back where are the edges of that consensus, so that more voices are heard and reflected in the pages of the dictionary. I think that's one of the biggest mandates on dictionary publishers today, is to take a more inclusive and broad view of what is that consensus.
Yeah. I really want to see hands. If there are hands, there's one right here. Maybe as you make your way there, one of the things I'm making this statement in a deliberately provocative way, John and Peter. Being in the commercial sphere means that you have to sell your soul to the devil in some form. You guys regularly publish every year you publish the most popular word of the year. You can do that also by month. In other words, you are able through the online to tell us what people are searching, what are the most popular words. And you were telling me, John, during dinner, that March Madness has resulted in certain words that are found, that when Trump used bloodbath, it was searched, at the top. And in the show that we were participating, somebody used the word goat for the greatest of all times and not for the animal. Is the word goat, by the way, in that, is it in the dictionary?
I believe it is in the most recent round of editions. It was added. Now, what he added another wrinkle to that. This had to do with the star of the women's tournament, basketball person, help me here. I'm forgetting her name.
Caitlin Clark?
Yes. And he said that people are saying that she has been goated. And it's very interesting.
That's not in the dictionary.
I don't think we put it in as a verb, but that's one of the things that always gets people most cranky about new developments in the English language, is what we call functional shift. When you take a noun and turn it into a verb, people get particularly cranky. And that's what people are saying, that she had been goated.
Yeah. And goat would be spelled all the letters in capitals?
Yes.
Thank you. I think we can hear you.
We're good? Okay. Thanks for coming, John. I just had two questions, I think, that I wanted to touch on. One of them we just talked about is the internet has sort of caused, obviously, a lot of change in American society and wider society. I think it's really interesting for me to consider the conversations that I have with my peers and with my friends, especially over the internet, because I think that a lot of the language that we use seems to be very, specifically non-academic and very different in a way. First question is, could you talk about, from a more technical side, how has editing the dictionary changed in this new age where words seem to change a lot more often? These functional shifts and other shifts seem to happen a lot more often as language is able to move a lot quicker over the internet. And my second question, sort of going off of that and tying it back to this theme of democracy, is there's a lot of, especially on the internet, there's a lot of marginalized communities that have very specific vocabulary and other words that they use that other groups might, refer to as slang or in other ways like that. How do you decide as a dictionary which words to include, which words are important to include? And how do you make considerations for the fact that some groups might view them as more important and other groups might view them as slang or just otherwise not proper?
Right. Well, your first observation is quite right, that language change is happening faster than ever before, and it is because of the internet. Words can establish themselves in the language so well that we want to put them in the dictionary in a matter of years, or just 1 or 2 years, whereas when I began my career, it was sort of a minimum of 10 years that you would see between when did we have our earliest piece of evidence for this word and when are we actually sitting down to write a definition? It was often about a 10-year span. Now, typically, it could be really just about a year or so. So you're right that it's happening faster. I think that, without being too flip, it just means we have to write definitions faster. But Peter can probably give a more nuanced answer to that. Whether it's slang or not is not really the issue. I mean, we have always included slang words in the dictionary. How do you decide when to put a slang word in? In the abstract, it's a simple concept. You put it in when you think people are going to be encountering it and going to the dictionary to look it up. A dictionary is a pragmatic tool. We're not really trying to put every word in the English language in there because that's just not going to be that useful. A dictionary is only useful to the extent that someone actually goes and looks at the entry you've written. So a real measure of whether you put a word in a dictionary or not is, do we think enough people are going to encounter it that it's worth the time and effort to put it in the dictionary? That's the abstract answer. To actually operationalize that gets a little tougher. How do you really make the decision that, yes, people are going to be interested in that word, we ought to get it in there? Some bold distinctions that I can certainly make is that most recently, when COVID-19 appeared and coronavirus appeared, and when the World Health Organization coined the word coronavirus, COVID-19, right? When they coined the word COVID-19, we had it in the dictionary within a month, 34 days.
That's only possible because of online.
That's only possible online. But I mean, that is how fast we're willing to move if we know if this is a word that is of crucial importance. For others, I think we're a little slow sometimes. Some of the words that are going in this year, you would have said, couldn't they have gone in 5-10 years ago? And all what I think a lexicographer can really tell you is, as so many other aspects of life, lexicography is the art of the possible. I mean, there's only so many lexicographers in so many days and so many hours. You have to make your decisions where you can. But I do think, and I think, I'll point to Merriam-Webster, particularly since I left. I think this is one of the things that we see more of. There is more of a concerted effort to make sure that language of coming from marginalized communities, especially if it is likely that a broader population is going to encounter them, that we get those into the dictionary as quickly as we can. And I'm forgetting the example of
some of the modal verbs of
African
American.
No. Well, I was thinking of, and I want to say bussin'. Which means very tasty.
Riz just got it.
And Riz
that one got
also,
a lot of attention.
Are words that I think have their origins in African American English, but it also words that more of us are encountering. So I think
is a word that comes from slang and incorporated into the dictionary automatically cease to be slang?
No. I think some words persist in being slang for a long time. I think this is no longer the case, but for a long period in the 20th century, from about the 1930s well into the 1960s, things were groovy. And I think that stayed slang. Dude, I think, has stayed slang for a lot of years. I think if you put dude in the dictionary today, you're going to have to call it slang. And again, that's been a long history.
In kind of the reverse of this wonderful second question that you were making, we were talking with John McWhorter, you were here, that offensive words, the moment they enter into the dictionary, might become less offensive because now they are recognized, and then communities have to find new alternatives to compete with offense. We always need a certain economy of offense in order to survive as a society.
I think what I'm going to have to tell you realistically is that dictionaries are always going to be about a half step behind that process. I'm sure John is right but I suspect we are reflecting something that's already happened, and we're not the cause of it happening. I really don't think too much language change occurs because of what we put in the pages of the dictionary. And
I remember there was a kind of a form letter that we used to send out from the editor-in-chief, Fred Misch, and it was the kind of standard response to people who complained about finding a word in the dictionary. And one of the sentences in that letter I'll just never forget was, nobody learned these words from the dictionary. And the fact that they are in the dictionary is telling the truth about language, and there was a deeply felt mission in that letter. But I think it's also true that, yes, we're not responsible for...
Are there any definitions or inclusions of words that you regret having put in?
I can't. No, is going to be my simple answer to that. I think, again, your job is to tell the truth about the language. That's what you're there for. You are there to report back to the English-speaking people the decisions they have made about their own language. And I can't imagine any situation, I can't remember one, and I can't imagine one where you would say, well, maybe we should have kept that a big secret.
Actually, it goes the other way. I think what we regret is having taken a word out occasionally. The famous example is that word snollygoster, which was kind of a 19th century word. It was famously used by President Truman, and then thereafter, in the ensuing decades, was only ever cited when citing President Truman. And so the use of that word just sort of sank. And then because space on the page was sort of very valuable in the arms race of the college dictionary wars in the 90s, that word was removed to make room for another word. And then the word came roaring back because a television personality decided to start using it, and we saw that people were looking it up online. So we put it back in.
Yes, a question right here. The microphone is coming from your right. But we need it for online.
If you guys know the website Urban Dictionary, which is like the different like crowdsourced model,
right,
and like a lot of internet stuff, like, do you think that's a whole alternative model that could work, or like it works well with also an edited dictionary? They can work together. How do you feel?
It is in a class by itself, and by that class, what I really mean is crowdsourced dictionaries are there are not many of them. They're quite rare. And I think the reason is that you can have a crowdsourced encyclopedia because if you're an expert in something, I mentioned just Shays Rebellion. Let's say you're a local historian around here and you've learned all about Shays Rebellion. It would be kind of fun to write an encyclopedia article about it and put it into Wikipedia. I don't care who you are. If we tell you that we need to have someone define the 34 senses of intransitive set, no one thinks that's fun. Samuel Johnson, I believe, said that no one but a blockhead ever wrote for anything but money. And I think that was probably after defining the 34 intransitive uses of the verb set. So it actually turns out that almost all of the online dictionaries that you're going to look at are written by professional lexicographers and originally under the auspices of a professional publishing company. Urban Dictionary is the outlier on that. It is a crowdsourced dictionary. I think it exists because it is fun to define new words and dirty words. I think anyone would like to have the duty to do all the new words and the dirty words. But I have to tell you, that's not what most people are looking up in the dictionary. We have the receipts. We know the words that are being looked up. In the early days of the dictionary, the F word was one of the most frequently looked up words in the dictionary. And I used to chide audiences by saying, we would have thought you knew the meaning of that word by now. But more and more now,
the word fuck has so many meanings.
Yes. Including one, we're getting off the subject here, but my favorite definition, and I believe it may have come from our editor-in-chief, Fred Misch, was the first time that we put we first put the F word in the dictionary in the 1973 8th edition, but then we made some changes to it in 1993 when we did the 9th edition, including a usage note at the verb for the F word, saying that the present participle is often used as a meaningless intensive.
And so I find Urban Dictionary incredibly helpful. You know, especially when words move from, say, a slang term is used in the New York Times, or it's used in carefully edited prose, but in a quotation or something. Urban Dictionary is a great resource because no one has any investment in lying in that kind of thing. But the function words, the glue of the language, the particles and the function verbs like have or set or run, they're not accounted for. So all of that's a huge amount of labor and things like the word the word a, those definitions actually get a lot of attention, and they're not at all in that kind of crowdsourced dictionary. You really do need professionals for that.
We have one more question here. We're coming to the end. Please. Right here. Thank you, Eloise. Back here.
Okay, I think I have maybe a two-part question. So I appreciated what you were saying about really trying to include as many voices as possible. Yet I was harkened back to something that you said earlier in the evening about the voice of the parent from 1924, saying, as my students would say, the old white male voice. At what point does that become problematic for your dictionary? That's one part. And the second part is from the write-up for tonight. It said, what role does the dictionary play in safekeeping American English? And I think those perhaps go hand in hand in terms of accessibility and, yeah, I'll leave it there.
All right. I think that the voice does evolve. I think that voice of authority I'm talking about is something maybe a generation or two behind us as we're speaking tonight. But first off, I think it's not no editor was ever told to talk like your grandparents. I think it is just something that one tends to fall into. And I think as we move forward from generation to generation, what that grandparent sounded like is going to change and evolve. And I hope at some point it isn't just old white men that voice sounds like. I think the other thing I would certainly point to is I think at Merriam-Webster there has been some pointed efforts to make some of that language less formal. But again, I think that also just reflects some generational changes. Often, and I think particularly when we are creating dictionaries for English language learners, what I've just said no longer applies. I think we make a particular effort with English language learners to express things in as simple a language as we can. And I think we praise simplicity over formality when we get to dictionaries that we know are going to people who have English as a second or a foreign language. I don't know. Peter, you're aware of some of the efforts that Merriam has made to sort of deliberately try to alter the voice.
Oh, absolutely. And we're living through it's going to take a couple generations to untie this knot. And the knot was tied for a really good reason, which was space on the page, that we were trying to shoehorn as much information as possible, which led to in-house rules, like we couldn't repeat any information. And you get these very technical, and frankly unlovable kind of definitions. A large, solid-hoofed, herbivorous, ungulate mammal. That's how we define the word horse. And that's pretty opaque. And that's the old style. Our new style is much more conversational. It's much more readily understandable because we now recognize that in all of our work going forward, that writing that old style of technical definition is actually not very helpful. So it doesn't answer the question that is presumably being asked. And so we are taking a long legacy of writing that kind of very technical definition, and for all the new work, writing in a much more readable and much more conversational voice that we learned initially. I mean, this is kind of in-house gossip in a way, but we had as a staff, we moved from the collegiate project to that ESL dictionary, to the Learner's Dictionary, and all of us wrote this new style, this new very plain English kind of definition, and then it was time to go back and work on the unabridged. And our chief editor said, who had been there for 30 years and was a virtuoso of the old style, and he said, "I will never write a definition like that again. Now that I've had the experience of writing more helpful, more clear English, and also, it has to be said, for the online version, without limitation of space, we give ourselves that breathing room to write in a much more human voice."
So how do you define horse?
In that dictionary, it says something like a large animal that is used for riding and pulling or carrying things. And so we had to give ourselves permission, something that we formerly did not have, that you can use the word animal to mean a living being with 4 legs. Which was not permissible in the old style because you had to identify its genus and its species. And that ties us to the other legacy of dictionaries, which is one of my passions, which is Latin, that the English language was always described in Latin terms because Latin was always the official bureaucratic, academic, and noble, all the rest of the languages. And that's what you referred to earlier with the kind of large amount of synonyms in English. It's because of that weird legacy that the scientific language of Europe was also coincidentally etymologically related to the bureaucratic language of the Norman French. And so we had these waves of vocabulary that came into English that also represented a class distinction, that there were 2 registers, and that class distinction is absolutely true to this very day. If you are good at that upper register of English, you will get a good grade on your SAT.
We have many questions here from alums. I'm just going to read one in the interest of time. They want you to, they are not using the word legislate, but they want you to explain which of the 2 is the right one. It is a good time to evaluate how much will you spend, vis-a-vis it is a good time to evaluate how much you will spend. Difference, will you spend, you will spend. Do you want to answer this one, or I have another question?
I would go on to the other question because we just are going to have a boring answer. Both of those uses are established in idiomatic English, so both of them are correct, and no need for anyone to lose sleep over this.
That doesn't sound boring at all. Here is the last question. Unless there's anybody else any hand that I see, this is the right time for you to, no? What is the difference, dear friends, between a dictionary and an encyclopedia? And is your dictionary sometimes entering the terrain of an encyclopedia?
The answer is yes, and it probably should not. But it is inevitable that happens. Encyclopedias are supposed to describe things. Dictionaries are supposed to define words and tell you meanings of words. Having said that, you would not have to look far in the dictionary to find places where we have gone beyond defining the word, and we have begun telling you a bunch of what we call, and clearly we know the problem, encyclopedic information. Mm-hmm. It probably doesn't need to be in the dictionary. However, having said that, again, the Darwinian competition has told us over the years that people tend to use dictionaries as mini encyclopedias, and even though we probably don't need to and maybe should not, we are going to end up describing things, and we're going to be a little mini encyclopedia even if we're way outside of our lane when we do it.
So I have 2 very brief anecdotes. One is that we do refer to this as encyclopedic information because there are times when the lexical information is insufficient. In order to define the difference between a Caesar salad and a Cobb salad, you have to give the recipe. And that has nothing to do with the lexical fact. It has everything to do with distinguishing one from the other. One has whatever, chopped eggs and bacon. So you'll find that information in the dictionary. When the first event that caused us to notice that the public looks up words cued by the news was the death of Princess Diana. We had put the dictionary online in 1997. We saw a kind of static list of SAT words, and then Princess Diana was killed, and immediately all the words changed of the words that were looked up, notably the word paparazzi, which was obviously a challenge. Every newsroom in America wanted to know, are there two R's, are there two Z's, are there two P? And that's one thing. The other word that was looked up was the word princess. And that was probably not for spelling. And I'm sure that in the case of paparazzi, you had a lexical question. How is it spelled? Maybe what does it mean? But with princess, you had an encyclopedic question. Are you born a princess? Does a princess automatically become a queen? Is a princess higher than a duchess? These are questions that are encyclopedic in nature, that have to do with the phenomenon of being a princess. They have nothing to do with the word itself. And yet that information is still embedded in a good definition. So my last anecdote is that we talked during dinner about a line between the phenomenon and the lexical. We can define the word love according to the company it keeps on the page. We can't tell you what you feel. One way that is expressed in our rules to write dictionary definitions is the way that we put proper nouns into the dictionary. And that is if they are lexicalized. It used to be that we had all the mythological gods and the characters of Shakespeare as entries in the dictionary, and we took them all out at one point just to save space and recognize that the dictionary wasn't the right place for this. However, if a word can be used in a generic way, as in the sentence, he's a real blank, and if that blank were the word, say, Romeo, now we can enter the term Romeo in the dictionary because it has a lexical definition that means a young male lover. And it has nothing to do with the fact that it's a character in Shakespeare, which is also added in the etymology because we have to give the source of this. So that's how we kind of have it both ways and allow for a lexicalized encyclopedic fact to become a dictionary definition.
Just extraordinary. This has been superb. I am so thankful in English, Spanish, and French that you came here, and it's a true humbling lesson to hear how the people behind a dictionary or inside a dictionary are thinking so thoroughly, how the rest of us speak and send words to you, and how you send words back to us. Thank you for all the work that you do, for all the work that you did for so many years, and all the work that you do, and all your colleagues that are here. And I think that my high school students were wrong. I think dictionaries are very important. Thank you very much. See you next week.